Bonjour tout le monde. J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 100.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee.
Hybrid format, pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and as well as remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards and the tables. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including and especially the interpreters. A kind reminder to all those in person and online that for the safety of your interpreters, that is very important that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking. Merci à tous pour votre coopération.
Thank you to all for your cooperation.
Chair, conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité reprend l'examen.
We will continue our study number 6 on Sustainable Development Canada, Technology Canada, reports 5 to 7 of the Auditor General of Canada.
Mr. John Newbley. Welcome, Mr. Newbley. You're joining us virtually, and you are the principal of Innovaction Advisory Services, Inc., joining us by video conference, as I said. Mr. Newbley, you have time for an opening statement, up to 5 minutes, please. The floor is now yours. And you are on mute, sir, so please take it again from the top. Oh, Mr. Newbley, you're on mute. If you'd like to unmute yourself and then start right from the top again. I think that's good.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can. Floor is yours, please.
And I was just saying that I wasn't hearing you terribly well, so.
Oh, well, let me.
I'll let you know if I can't hear you.
Let's try to resolve this now so we don't break the flow. Can you hear me now, Mr. Newbley? Is that, I'll put the microphone up a little bit. Is that clear? Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Okay, good, yeah. I think my mic was just down a little bit, so apologies for that. Over to you, please.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you to the committee. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on part of the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. I'm John Newbley, who was Deputy Minister for 12 years in the federal government. I served as Deputy Minister of Industry in the renamed Innovation, Science and Economic Development, ISED, from September 2012 to June 2019. I now am a Senior Advisor and Board Director. A Deputy Minister, as you know, is the Senior Manager of the Ministry and Portfolio. The role is the highest level of public servant. At the time, the department had about 5,000 employees and the portfolio about 24,000. Expenditures were about $7 billion annually. I supported several ministers for industry, for science, for small business, tourism, and broadband, including 4 appointments. As I am no longer in the public service, I do rely on my memory for my testimony. I don't have access to my past agenda or basically information from that time. So the following is what I remember. There were 16 agencies in the portfolio. As the Deputy Minister, and like those before me, I delegated authority for managing the interface between these agencies and the department to my senior executive, usually Assistant Deputy Ministers. This is what was done for Sustainable Development Technologies Canada, SDTC. SDTC serves a small economic sector with emerging areas of technology. Since 2001 and its creation, it was designed to be independent of government, with business leaders from the clean tech sector responsible for the work. It was not uncommon for business leaders involved to have experiences or linkages in the field. It is uniquely defined by being a shared governance corporation with its own act. When I began my role in the department, SDTC was not part of the portfolio. In 2015, SDTC was transferred to ISED from Natural Resources Canada and Environment Canada. In 2016, the government gave the department, ISED, a broad mandate to promote clean technology and to lead this as a pillar in the pan-Canadian framework for climate change. Canada was recognized for strong innovative capacity in this field, but fell short in its ability to commercialize, a problem that remains today. New policy goals were developed to increase engagement with industry and to improve coordination across stakeholders in the clean tech sector to help find new pathways to commercialization. In 2017 and 18, ISED made clean technology one of 6 CEO-led sector tables. This table made recommendations on how the sector could help boost Canada's GDP and exports. All of the initiatives were part of an innovation and skills agenda supporting talent, science and technology, access to capital, commercialization, and streamlining. The Auditor General's report of 2017 and the Department's evaluation of 2018 guided the Ministry's role in support of STTC. The focus was on policy and helping to prove its important performance, its effective reporting and data on emission reductions, and alignment with other departments and governments involved in the clean tech sector. As I said, it was not typical for me to be involved in the many PCO-led processes for appointments to the portfolio agencies. In the case of STTC, this role was delegated in 2018. In terms of the milestones of the process, I was asked by PCO to have the department do outreach to stakeholders at the launch of the process and again in April. This was a common practice for the department to encourage a wide range of applicants. I do not remember ever talking about any STTC candidates with Minister Baines or his political staff. I did talk to Annette Verschuren in late June, just before I retired. It was normal that as a deputy minister, I would talk to her in the onboarding process. At the time, I was also reaching out to a series of key stakeholders to inform them I was retiring on June 28th. She and I had both been active members on the Science, Technology, and Innovation Council created by Prime Minister Harper. We also had served as members of the CEO-led sector table on clean technology. To be frank, I don't have strong recall of this particular telephone call. I was having lots of calls at the time given my pending departure and retirement. In the call, I do remember talking to her about the go-forward modernization of STTC. The aim was to move beyond just testing and piloting technologies. New activities were to be added to promote startup and scale up of firms, as well as to focus on commercialization. On the issue of conflict of interest, I was aware that she had engaged the ethics commissioner. I would also have expected that conflicts were fully addressed by the PCO appointment process. Moreover, on a go-forward basis, I generally expected as a deputy minister that all government departments and agencies, big or small, would regularly develop, refine, and implement policies for real or perceived conflicts, including STTC. Canadians do have a right to expect this. Let me conclude by saying that STTC has played a key role in supporting the clean tech sector in Canada. I was struck then by how Canada had 11 of the top 100 global clean tech companies, second only to the United States, and now there are 13. STTC played a role in supporting many of them.
Thank you, Mr. Newby. I'm going to stop you there, but I know you'll probably be getting more of those questions from our witnesses, so we'll come back to that, I'm sure. Beginning our first round, which is 4 members, each with 6 minutes. Mr. Perkins, you have the lead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Nubley. Thank you for appearing on this important study. You said in your opening statement that STTC was transferred over to ISED in 2015. Jim Balsillie was the chair, I believe, at that time, and had Leah Lawrence been appointed, I believe she was appointed CEO in 2015. Was that before or after it was transferred?
My understanding is that it was before, in August 2015. We've had testimony that they were put in place to clean up some management challenges with STTC before that. And I believe you referenced the Auditor General report in 2017. We've had testimony on that too. Governance was part of that review, was it not? No, I believe governance was only the subject of the evaluation in 2018.
Not a clean bill of health, I understand, from both Treasury Board and the Auditor General. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, again, I have quotes from the Auditor General of 2017. One is we found that SDTC had measures in place to mitigate potential conflict of interest in assessing and improving projects. Another is SDTC had a comprehensive process in place to review proposals against predetermined criteria.
So, thank you for that. Now, during your time as deputy in the last Parliament, the government introduced the Privacy Bill C-11, as Minister Baines would have been the lead for that. You recall that bill?
Are you referring to PIPEDA?
Yes.
Well, I recall the bill and that there was a great deal of emphasis on privacy issues related to digital matters. This is something I talked. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Do you recall the chair of SDTC at the time, Jim Balsillie, going before parliamentary committees commenting on that bill?
No, but what I can tell you is that I met Jim Balsillie many times over the course from 2015 really to 19, talking about these digital issues, the need for an IP strategy in the department, which was announced in 2018. He was focused on patent collectives. I invited him to the department to meet deputy ministers to talk about his experience at his former company and what kind of challenges he faced with IP trolls. I can go on that, but I'll stop.
So, were you aware that the minister was not pleased, Mr. Baines was not pleased, according to Leah Lawrence, the CEO, with the criticism that the chair had, Mr. Balsillie, of Bill C-11 and other privacy-related issues around Facebook and other data breaches?
No.
Aware of that. So I'll just read you what Ms. Lawrence's testimony was. In particular, in the time between 2018 and into early 2019, there were several moments when it was raised with me or with my team that there were concerns about public statements that Mr. Balsillie was making as an individual. At the time, there was a consultation underway on data and digital legislation. Of course, this is an area he's an expert in. He would make critiques about the legislation and provide input in his role as an individual. Often in the aftermath of those statements, we would get calls asking why a GIC appointment was making these statements. You don't recall any of that? That your department was calling the CEO to comment about public statements of the chair of SDTC.
So what I want to put on record in relation to Leah Lawrence is that she never called me during my tenure as a deputy minister.
I didn't ask you the question. You don't recall any discussion between you, the minister, or any of your ADMs or the minister's office staff about Mr. Balsillie's comments in public about the failures of the Liberal legislation at the time?
No. What I want to make clear is that we talked about the issues that he had all the time. We were trying to establish a very effective IP strategy with Patent Collective, as Mr. Balsillie proposed. And we
I understand this. This is about
education initiatives.
Sorry, Mr. Newbley
wanted to pursue.
Mr. Newbley, sorry, my question was about his criticism of the government, not about the ongoing consultation, his public criticism and his role as SDTC chair.
I had no conversation with the minister in that regard.
Your ADM was conveying those, your ADM Noseworthy was conveying those concerns on his own?
I don't think Mr. Noseworthy would have conveyed anything on a digital charter. His responsibilities were for the oversight.
The headset's not working. Perhaps the headset's not working well. It wasn't about the digital charter. It was about the public comments of the chair of SDTC being critical of the government. That ADM Noseworthy had asked the CEO whether or not he could get him to keep quiet.
I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of that.
Knows
Thank
whether
you,
he did
Mr.
that on his
Perkins.
own.
That is your time, I'm afraid. Turning on to Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please, Ms. Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Nubley, for appearing today as a witness. You're a former deputy minister of ISED, and we've heard multiple witnesses state that it's customary for departments to send emails to stakeholders regarding appointment openings. Given that Ms. Verschuren served on the Clean Tech Strategy Table and there was a working relationship with the department, would it have been customary to send Ms. Verschuren and other stakeholders an email notifying them of the opening/appointment opportunity?
I think the short answer is yes, but let me explain. So the way this works is I did ask Andrew Noseworthy to reach out to the stakeholders in the clean tech community. I understand that he had about a list of 250 stakeholders, and yes, Annette Verschuren would have been on that list.
Just to get it on the record, I know it's been a few years, but would you be able to confirm to this committee if the department did in fact send out a mass email to stakeholders in September 2018, fall of 2018? I think you just said that probably around 200 just went out at that time. And do you remember if the Clean Tech Strategy Table members were included in the list? Would Ms. Verschuren been one of those email recipients?
I think the answer is yes to all of these, but I think you would need to ask specifically Mr. Noseworthy about this. I would have fully expect that on this large list of stakeholders, there would have been the members of the CEO-led sector table, as well as Ms. Verschuren.
Now, the Privy Council Office has stated that the appointment process with regards to Ms. Verschuren was normal. There was nothing abnormal about the appointment process, and her name was provided to the minister via the habitual letter of advice. Do you remember if there was anything abnormal from your point of view with the appointment process for the new SDTC chairperson in 2018-19?
So I think what I should say on this is my role in the appointment process, once I delegated it, was to, and this is the normal deputy minister role, is to ensure that from the department's perspective, the process is timely and taking place, and that's my perspective. So as, from that perspective, I am not aware of any unusual aspects of the process.
Had been sent up to the minister a month or two before the second letter. The latter recommended Ms. Verschuren's name. There were two shortlisted names for chairperson. From your recollection, was it strange for the PCO to send up a second letter of advice? And did the first two individuals fall short in the minister's view?
So I want to make clear, because I had delegated authority for this, I have no knowledge of the names of people involved in the process throughout. In terms of a second round of reach out to applicants, let me put it this way, it wasn't the first time in an appointment process where we had done a second round, because people were, there was, I presume, a consideration that the first sets of names were not sufficient for the purpose of making an appointment by the minister.
So elaborating on that then, can you speak to the department's recommendations to the minister with regards to the chairperson selection? Did the department provide suggestions to the minister in this process?
So my understanding is that the department does not prepare notes on appointments. The appointment recommendation comes from PCO and the PCO-led person. And in this case, again, I'm working on memory of 5.5 years. I do not recall any memo coming from the department on this appointment.
You know, I believe in your opening statement, you mentioned that you did have conversations with Ms. Verschuren from time to time, often during the onboarding process, and then the late in June, just before retiring. In any of these discussions, did any of her conflicts of interest come up in conversation?
Yeah, I want to clarify. I only had one conversation with her, and that was, I mean, in terms of this appointment, and it was, I believe, in late June. And as I said in my testimony, it was I was in the process of retiring. I believe, although I'm not absolutely certain, that she did raise that she was working with the ethics commissioner, and that she was addressing this issue, and that the ethics commissioner's office had provided guidelines and indicated to her that she could proceed with an appointment.
But just to clarify, that wasn't the only conversation you ever had with her, period. You often, I think you testified.
No, I often talk to her, particularly in the context of the CEO sector table and STIC. But I didn't talk to her about this appointment until the very end of the process.
Right, okay.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. That is the time as well.
Thank you.
Maintenant, c'est Madame Sinclair.
Now it's time for Ms. Sinclair Gagné.
It's from the Bloc québécois. Elle va parler français.
She will speak French.
You might change your headset. Of course, I think you have it on the set. That's working perfectly well, but I just wanted to flag that to you. Madame Sinclair Gagné, vous avez 6 minutes.
I'm not hearing anyone.
Oh, are you not hearing me, sir?
No.
No. All right.
Well, I am now.
Okay.
But it's very faint.
But
sorry.
The microphone is right in front of you. Well, we'll begin with Madame Sinclair Gagné. Elle a 6 minutes. C'est possible qu'on va avoir des problèmes techniques, mais on a connaissance au début.
Je croise les doigts. Bonjour, Monsieur Noublé. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Bonjour. Ça va bien?
Bon, super, merci. Donc,
Yes, I'm doing well. Great, excellent. Thank you for being here with us this morning. I have a few questions, especially regarding the roles of each person in your department. Mr. Noseworthy, your ADM, was there during meetings with the SDTC board, but in the Auditor General's report, we see, and in the findings of the report, we see that Mr. Noseworthy does not seem aware of his roles and responsibilities. You were Deputy Minister at the time. Mr. Noseworthy was on your team, therefore. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. What I want to say here is that, again, I think there were two representatives, if you like, of during my time playing the role of interface with SDTC. It wasn't Andrew Noseworthy the full time. I believe there was another person who was the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Innovation programs. And then in terms of their role, I mean, I do agree with the Auditor General's report, which says that there ideally, or there should be in place a stated description of what the role of that person who is playing the relationship with SDTC from the department. So I agree with that. Having said that, when in my experience, and partly why I pointed to the evaluation of 2018, if you look there, there's a detailed management action plan in response to the evaluation, which spells out in some detail what Andrew Noseworthy's role was. And
Monsieur Noublé, pourquoi?
And by the way, I would like to table, Mr. Chair, perhaps after the meeting, this management action plan. I guess if I were still a deputy, I would have got organized in advance and tabled it in advance.
Sure, you're welcome to send in anything. I've stopped the clock, Madame Sinclair Gagné. You have 3 minutes 40 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur Noublé.
3 minutes, 40 seconds. Mr. Newbley, please, could you tell us why Mr. Noseworthy was attending board meetings? A very quick answer, please. Why was he there?
Well, I had a view as a deputy minister, which is not shared by all deputy ministers, that there is an advantage to having members of the department ex officio, they're not actually members of the board, participating in the board meetings. Why is that? It's because without the direct participation in the board meetings, it's very challenging for the department to have an eye on the department or eye on the SDTC.
Justement, considérez-vous vraiment...
Exactly. Do you think that the department had knew what was happening as DTC? Do you think that that ISED really saw what was happening at SDTC? That's kind of what you said. So you're confirming that Mr. Andrew Noseworthy was responsible for informing the department of what was happening at SDTC. The department, that was you, and after that, it was the minister. Have I understood correctly?
Yes, and let me just say and explain that he had quite a detailed agenda with them. It was, overall, it was about policy and performance. If you look at the Evaluation Management Action Plan, it talks about data issues that are needed to, particularly, and this was in the Auditor General's report of 2017, establish sound evidence around to what extent these projects were actually reducing emissions.
D'accord, merci. Mon temps est limité, Monsieur Noublé. Désolé de vous interrompre.
My apologies.
Noublé, désolé de vous interrompre. Mon temps est...
Sorry to interrupt you, but my time is limited and I have many questions for you still. If you allow me.
Answers, though.
Monsieur...
Mr. Noseworthy was there at the board meetings. Was he reporting to you any conflict of interest cases? The fact that there were a number of them actually, and that the Auditor General has judged many of them to have been real conflicts of interest where they should have recused themselves, but they did not. Did Mr. Noseworthy report any of those to you when you were Deputy Minister? He should have known about them.
So all these things happened after I retired.
Non, Monsieur Noublé, en 2017,
2019.
2017 et 2000.
No, 2017 and 2018. 2017, 2018, I have here in the Auditor General's report conflict of interest by Ms. André-Lise Méthode. I have the dates here if you'd like them. August 3rd, 2017, and May 1st, 2018. You were Deputy Minister at that time. Mr. Noseworthy was in the room at that meeting, at those meetings rather. So I would need to know whether you were aware of the fact that the conflict of interest policy was not respected.
What I was aware of is what is in the Auditor General's report of 2017 and the evaluation report of 2018, which said there was a sound governance structure, that there were conflict of interest rules being pursued, and that there were good processes around the implementation of the programming.
Ah, d'accord, donc vous avez arrêté de travailler.
So you stopped working at that point? If you're doing a good job, you can just stop looking at conflict of interest policies. I mean, the policies are there. And in the Auditor General's report, dated March 31st, 2017, we can see that there are some problems there. She began her audit April 1st, 2017. I think you were still Deputy Minister then. And that report states that the rules were not clear for conflicts of interest and they were not followed. There were 90 cases between 2017 and the later dates. But they occurred while you were Deputy Minister and your ADM was there. Your question, please. He was sitting there in the room at the meeting. So you're telling me that all of the follow-up policies worked, even though the Auditor General is telling us that it's different? Are you refuting her findings?
No, I'm not refuting her findings, but what I'm telling you is that what I knew in 2019 and prior to that was what is contained in the AG's report of 2017 and the evaluation report. And on governance, again, there was a clean bill of health. There was reference, I think, in the evaluation report to improving the note-taking around conflict of interest and informing ISED. I think I was aware of that. And in terms of the issues about the agreements actually meeting the eligibility requirement, I think it's important that members understand that the work that was being done for some years, including before it came to ISED around performance measures, you need to have strong performance measures, especially from a longer term perspective in terms of measuring emission reductions. And these are key to eligibility requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Newbley. Appreciate that answer. Up next is Ms. Matheson. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Newbley, for appearing before us today. And apologies as a new member on this committee and subbing in. I hope that my questions aren't too repetitive. However, just to get back to what Madame Sinclair Desgagnés was talking about. So you had put Mr. Noseworthy on the board to ensure that you had a good, level of communication, a good route of communication. How long had you worked with ADM Noseworthy by this point?
At that point, or no, sorry. So with respect to Andrew Noseworthy, we have had a long history of working together. We in fact met first on the Meech Lake Accord in the late 80s, early 90s, late 80s to be precise. He at that time was at Intergovernmental Affairs Newfoundland. I then went on to work at Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency in Halifax. I was the vice president there from 2002 to 2000.
To cut you off as well a little bit, just because I also have a limited amount of time. So in terms of that relationship, then, you were fully trusting him to continue to do that good work that you had assessed of him thus far in this role that he had as that liaison between you and SDTC.
Yes, I trusted my relationship with Andrew Noseworthy. And just to, again, clarify, the overall approach at this time, partly because of these earlier reports, was all about focusing on policy, commercialization, improving data, reporting on emissions. This was the focus.
So at no point do all of the members, within deputy ministers, assistant deputy ministers, are they given full training for conflict of interest on the policies that are related to conflict of interest?
Yes, there is a training module, if you like, that I think is offered by the School of Public Service on conflict of interest.
Training?
And I think, well, not training. There's you can access, I think, online.
Is everyone mandated to take that?
Pardon me?
Is everyone mandated to take that at the levels of deputy minister and assistant deputy minister?
I believe the answer is yes, but I think you'd have to ask PCO on that one.
Okay. Do you remember taking it yourself?
Yes.
How many times did you have to take it? Like once a year? Or just
I was
once?
in government for a long time, so I probably did it twice.
Okay. So Andrew Noseworthy would have been required to take that as well.
I would think so, but again, you'd have to ask Andy.
Okay. And part of your role is to ensure that in that liaisonship, he was to tell you not just about policy or procedures or how these specifics relating to this commercialization was supposed to go. He is supposed to tell you everything that goes on.
Well, I think I need to say here, and it's important for members to understand, that the relationship between ISED and SDTC needs to respect the full independence of the agency. And in fact, that was part of the way we thought about the relationship. So in this case, and really in the case of all agencies that are independent, close to not-for-profits as STTC, the expectation is that the board and the management are responsible for the conflict of interest policies, the management of finances,
Okay,
and
however,
the contribution agreement.
one would assume that within that independence, it's so that government doesn't interfere in the not-for-profit. But if you had somebody as sitting non-officio on the board, that information is supposed to go up, correct? The interference isn't supposed to go down, but the information is supposed to go up. Was that not the role of Andrew Noseworthy at the time for you as to relate to you as the deputy minister?
I think if you ask Andrew Noseworthy, and you should do that, he would say that he was very careful in how he participated in relation to these kinds of issues.
Is that not what you
The reason-
expected of
and
him,
can I just
though?
finish this?
You were his
The reason
boss.
for this, can I just finish this? I happened to actually be the Associate Deputy Minister of NRCan in 2007, and there was an Auditor General's report in 2007, which actually sanctioned NRCan and Environment Canada for interfering too much in their operations and not respecting their independence. So there's a very delicate balance in this case and in all cases with agencies of this kind in terms of the monitoring relationship. And as I said, the responsibility for doing this fundamentally resides with the CEO and the chair of the board of STTC.
Looking back at this entire situation, however, and knowing that you specifically asked your assistant deputy minister to be that liaison, knowing that it's not about interfering from top down, but in fact providing information from the bottom or from this organization up to you through that liaison agreement, are you not concerned, looking back now, as to what happened, that was not occurring, that information was not being shared upward? Not interference downward, but information being shared upward.
Well, I think what I can say is that, I generally expected as a deputy minister that all agencies and departments that I was responsible for would regularly develop, refine, and implement policies for real or perceived conflicts. That was my job, to make it clear that was their responsibility.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Beginning now our second round, which will have various times. Mr. Nader, you're kicking us off. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to our witness for joining us this morning. Mr. Nobley, I want to go back to your testimony before this committee on a different matter in June of 2023 on the Trudeau Foundation. But my question, you were asked at that time to explain why you had joined and why you had left McKinsey & Company back in September 2022. But at that time, you didn't have time to actually complete your answer to that question. So I want to start off with asking you that question. If you could tell us exactly when you joined and when you left McKinsey and the reasons why you left that company.
Yeah, so I worked for 2 years with McKinsey as a senior advisor. And I began in September 2021 and left in 2023. In taking that role, I did follow all the procedures required with the ethics commissioner. And the reason for leaving was because I was very busy as a consultant with other organizations, but I was not busy with McKinsey. And perhaps one more point, just to clarify, in no circumstance with McKinsey did I play the role of lobbyist. I did not engage with my former colleagues at McKinsey. My role was as a senior advisor, which basically provided advice to McKinsey about the work that they were doing.
To confirm that you didn't have any dealings with the government in your time at McKinsey then.
I did not.
No, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Want to talk a little more about SDTC and its move from its previous home to the umbrella of ISED in 2015. Minister Baines appeared at committee, industry committee in November of 2017. You were with him at that time. And I just find it interesting about when it's convenient for Minister Baines to note that SDTC was at arm's length and independent when it's convenient for the narrative, and when it's not convenient. Because at that time, he was taking credit for it. The move to ISED, taking credit for its then clean bill of health, but then all of a sudden when things went wrong, it was no longer his responsibility. So I want to start out with, was moving SDTC to the umbrella of ISED the appropriate move at the time, or with the benefit of hindsight, should it have been left where it was?
Well, that's a good question. So here's my answer, which is what was really transferred to the minister was a mandate for clean technology. And as I mentioned, part of that involved leading the pillar on clean technology in the Pan-Canadian framework for climate change, which was led by the Minister of Environment. So we were very active, and what we were trying to do is, as Minister and Deputy Minister, was promote a strong clean tech sector that would actually be a leading part of global activity on clean technology, and that the sector would also contribute significantly to growth in Canada. So it was clean technology was definitely a very important part of our innovation and skills agenda. The role of STTC, though, was but one tool among many in that regard. There was funding as well from the regional development agencies. There was funding from BDC, EDC. One of the challenges was, and this is what we actually focused on, was how do we bring all these players together so that it's easy for companies to come forward and find out where they should go to government, and also what to do about the different requirements that were quite onerous from time to time from the different agencies who were all using different data and data frameworks.
I'm going to move on to a different point because I'm running out of time. I want to go. The Auditor General noted that there were 90 cases where conflict of interest policies were not followed. I want you to note in your 7 years as a deputy minister, were there other appointments outside of SDTC that would have been acceptable? Would you have seen it as acceptable to appoint people to boards, agencies within the purview of ISED when you were deputy minister if there were clear conflicts of interest upon their appointment? Would that have been acceptable outside of SDTC and other organizations within the ISED portfolio?
Well, I think I should say that there are conflicts of interest, in my experience, in many places, in departments and agencies and appointments. So what I would have seen is that there were appointments where there were conflicts of interest, but the issue is, are they being addressed and mitigated? And in the case of Mr. Sherin, what I understood was that she had reached out to the ethics commissioner and had guidance. And I expected that that work between her and the ethics commissioner would have continued. And I think that kind of process is the same as for any appointment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll come back to that. I'm sure the time is up. Turn now to Mr. Erskine Smith. Mr. Erskine Smith, did a chicken roaster open up outside your home over the weekend? You are coming off as orange red. I don't know if anyone gets the Seinfeld reference, but you're welcome to proceed. I'm sure we'll hear you clearly, but over to you for 5 minutes, please.
No, it did not, but I don't know, new camera, I'm not sure. My first question is just in relation to your relationship with Ms. Verschuren. You mentioned at the outset of your testimony that you had met her via some work, I think, where she had been appointed under the Harper government. But how often did you see her? Or would you consider yourself friends outside of that work context?
No, it was an entirely professional relationship. I did have a long history, as well as a long history with Jim Basile. Just quickly, the first time I met her, I was vice president of Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. She came to see the executive of ACOA to talk about her how she was a leading Atlantic global business leader who had worked with Home Depot and Michaels. I think I did work with her again when she was on the advisory committee for Jim Flaherty. There were several panels that I was on where we were both probably panelists. And then, as I said, in this organization created by Prime Minister Harper, it was called STIC, or Science, Technology, and Innovation Council. It met 3 or 4 times a year. So for a 3-year period, we would be at these same meetings. And then subsequently, she was on this CEO-led sector table, which again had, I think, 6 to 8 meetings on the clean tech sector and making recommendations there. So that was the basis of my relationship with her.
Understood. And just so I'm clear, how many years did you say you worked in the civil service before your retirement?
I've been trying to avoid that answer. It's close to 40 years.
Okay, so you got 40 years in the civil service. Ms. Verschuren is one of many people that you worked with in a professional context over those 40 years. You were answering Mr. Nader's question. I think a more fulsome answer would be helpful because some confusion exists at this committee as to whether all conflicts are fatal or whether some conflicts can be managed. And obviously, there are some conflicts that are fatal, that it's impossible to appropriately manage and mitigate. This was a case, though, where Ms. Verschuren engaged with the ethics commissioner, and while we've obviously realized, unfortunately, in the end, the conflict was mismanaged, I think, by Ms. Verschuren pretty apparently. At the outset of the appointment, did you think this was a conflict that could be managed, or do you think that it was fatal to the appointment?
I think I thought that it was a conflict that could be managed. But again, it's not for me to decide that as a deputy minister. What I was told, and I think by Ms. Verschuren, was that she was engaging and working with the ethics commissioner. They had she had received advice and was on a track, and I would expect that would have continued, or would have expected that would continue. The one thing I would say, because I noticed it in the testimony, there's reference to the clause in the Act that suggests that you cannot hire someone who has a conflict. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but that's a pretty standard clause. And my interpretation of that, but perhaps you should get legal advice, that you are their appointments can happen when there are conflicts, and as long as they are being managed.
With respect to the concerns raised at the time around the standing conflict with NR Store, were you part of discussions around the comfort level of yourself, of Minister Baines, of others, in terms of how this conflict could be managed?
Absolutely not.
And when you retired, when?
June 28th, 2019.
And in the court, obviously you weren't there for when the specific instances of approvals were made at STDC that have been subject to the conflicts with respect to Ms. Verschuren in particular. But conflict of interest, the mismanagement of conflicts that has marked the board at STDC, that never came to your attention?
No, as I say, there were these 2 reports that gave them a clean bill of health, and governance was part of the evaluation. They said there were some issues to be addressed, which included the note-taking and the reporting to ISED. There was a suggestion that they should streamline their committee structure. There was a suggestion, I think, in there that the skills and capacities of the board directors in all areas be examined, and I think that would be included.
Thank you. That is the time. Suivant encore, c'est Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés, you have 2 minutes and a half. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Newby. When Ms. Lawrence appeared before the committee, she mentioned that on a number of occasions she expressed her reservations regarding Ms. Verschuren's appointment, especially in terms of conflicts of interest, potential conflicts of interest. In your case, at what point were you informed of the CEO's reservations?
So, as far as I can recall, I was not informed of her reservations. What I was informed of by Andrew Noseworthy was that, or not, sorry, I should be careful on this one, because I'm not sure who said what. I mean, we discussed that she had gone to the ethics commissioner on this issue, and that we both understood that that the ethics commissioner had provided guidance. And sorry, the only time that this happened was at the time of appointment in late June, as far as I can remember. The call that I had with her was at that late June period.
Je n'ai pas entendu votre dernière phrase, s'il vous plaît.
I didn't hear your last sentence. There was noise. Could you repeat your last sentence, please?
Sure, I'll say two things. One is it only happened at the end of the appointment process. So that was in late June. And the second thing is Leah Lawrence, as far as I know, because she rarely talked to me about other issues related to SDTC, never tried to reach out to me about these issues.
D'accord.
I understand. So, yes, she was appointed very quickly, Ms. Verschuren, that is. We heard it from a number of different witnesses, but I want to insist on the fact that she mentioned on a number of occasions that she would try to prevent any potential conflicts of interest. In terms of Ms. Verschuren's appointment, did Ms. Lawrence talk about other people at the department? But you weren't aware. That's what I'm understanding. So she never raised any doubts with you as to Ms. Verschuren's appointment?
Not as far as I can remember.
Et voilà, merci
As I
beaucoup.
said, I think I can count on my fingers the times I talked to her at SDTC, and they were actually around 2015-16.
Thank you, Mr. Noob. Turning now to Ms. Matheson, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please. Over to you.
I'm not hearing you, Chair.
Oh, can you not hear me again? Well, I'm glad you hear that at least the members here, so that's all that matters. We're going now to the NDP member.
I'm glad to hear that too.
Yes,
Sorry.
so you're hearing the right people. Floor for 2.5.
Thank you. Sorry, so just to be clear from the questions just asked, you didn't hear directly from CEO Leah Lawrence about her concerns around the conflict of interest. However, Leah Lawrence said that she spoke to the Assistant Deputy Minister, Andrew Noseworthy, and had informed him about the specific issues. And you didn't hear from Andrew Noseworthy about her concerns. Like, that information did not go up the chain to you.
I think the answer is yes. I think what I also need to say, though, is that Andrew Noseworthy and I discussed the fact that Mr. Verschuren had gone to the ethics commissioner.
So wouldn't you have expected, because you had said before that the reason often the ADMs were not put on into these positions, but you ran things a bit differently, and you decided to put ADMs on all of these boards just so you knew what was going on. But wasn't it your expectation that in that they would have reported anything going up that chain, including CEO Lawrence's reservations or concerns about the appointment of Ms. Verschuren?
Well, I'll say two things, and I'll try and keep it brief. The reason I put people on the boards, and I don't think I was the only deputy minister that did this, is so that there was eyes and ears of the department in the activities of the board. I think, as I said The role, though, was to focus more on policy, performance, alignment with other departments, and that was the focus. In terms of Andrew Noseworthy reporting to me on this issue, I think you need to look at his testimony, which I believe says that he was informed by her when he was in the process of informing her that Annette was being appointed. So it was very late in the process. But again, I'm reluctant to say more, and honestly I don't remember. So I think it's a question you should ask Andrew Noseworthy.
Do you have a brief question?
Well, this seems to contradict the testimony of Ms. Lawrence, or what she has said. So I guess I'll leave it at that if I don't have time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next is Mr. McCauley. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Nobley, thanks for being with us today. You mentioned earlier that you were aware of conflicts of Ms. Van Scheren because of your work together with the Science Innovation Council and another council. I assume that's correct?
No, that's not correct.
So you were not aware of any, you weren't aware of any conflict that she had with
No, I was aware of two things. Let me be clear.
Okay, what two things, please?
Appointment. Yeah, just a second. Can I complete my two things?
Go ahead.
One is that that as she was appointed and being onboarded, I was aware that she had reached out to the ethics commissioner and had guidance. The second thing is I was aware that NORSTOR had received a grant from SDTC 18 months earlier. So as a deputy minister, I was aware that that grant had happened. Those are the two things I knew.
Did PCO to address the conflict?
Sorry, what I understand, I have participated in some of these interviews.
No, but you did state earlier today, the comment was you expected PCO, the Privy Council Office, to address the conflict.
No. I said that when you go through a PCO process, merit-based, that there's a whole significant activity around conflict of interest.
So, as
it's
deputy,
actually a form, and it's about 40 pages about conflict of interest.
As deputy minister, you were not.
I know actually complained about the forms.
Thanks, sir. Interrupt because I'm short of time. So it sounds like you were not aware. This is not like one case of conflict of interest, or 2, or 10, or 15. This was like 90. This is it seems like the majority of the grants contributions were conflicted. And you're saying you were not aware of these. And what I'm getting at is, I've been at committee for 9 years in operations committee and this committee and other committees. And one thing that seems above all is the bureaucracy, deputy ministers, ADMs, all are extremely risk adverse, all have a CYA attitude. And I'm trying to comprehend how there was such rampant conflict that your ADM, who would be going out of his way to ensure that he was covering himself, did not inform you of these, that you did not inform the minister. How did all of this be kept? How was all this kept secret? This rampant conflict of interest, hundreds of millions of taxpayers' money being possibly defrauded.
Let me say several things.
Sure.
First of all, I was not a deputy minister during the period of COVID when there were these blanket exceptions. Number two.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. These are not all just COVID related. Sir, these are not COVID. These are not all COVID related.
I'm aware of that, but having said that, as I've already testified, there was a clean bill of health.
At 2017, not at
2018 and 2017. So how would I, as a deputy minister,
these conflicts happened between 2017 and 2019 before your departure?
Pardon me?
So none of these conflicts happened between 2017 and your departure midway through 2019.
No, I understand that the Auditor General has identified these issues.
Right. Let me
think
just
they're,
ask you.
in terms of the overall number.
Sure. Let me
they're
just
a
move on to
relatively
something
smaller
else, sir.
number than-
Just quickly, because I'm almost out of time. The contribution agreement between ISED and STDC 2003 states 20.03. Foundation shall disclose to the minister within a month of the foundation first becoming aware of any actual or potential situations that may be reasonably interpreted as a conflict of interest or potential conflict. Were any of these reported to you to report to the minister?
No.
So
What I would say is if you look at the evaluation of 2018, there is a reference to how in the governance there needs to be improved note-taking as well as improved
specifically
reporting.
about the contribution
Can I finish,
agreement
please?
between ISED. No, sir, this is my time. And I asked a specific
Well, it's my
question. I'm
time,
not
too.
asking about 2017. I'm asking specifically about the contribution agreement. So at no time, 90 conflicts, $400 million, at no time was any conflict reported from the foundation, is what you're saying. As part of the contribution agreement, it's required, and yet no conflicts were ever reported.
No, I think there was, sorry, let me clarify. There is a process between SDTC and the department to report conflicts. This would go to the ADM of administration as well as ADM of clean tech. That's a process. There was one comment when I was deputy minister, when there were suggestions or recommendations that the note-taking be improved relating to this, and that the SDTC ensure that it passes on information to the department. I believe the Auditor General found that that information was not always flowing.
Thank you, Mr. Newbley. Our next member, Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Newbley, for appearing here today. So I just want to follow down the line of questioning of Mr. McCauley and try to put some context into exactly what is happening here. So when we talk about context, and I appreciate that you've got 40 years of context to provide us, which I think is really helpful. So back in 2014, I believe Prime Minister Harper and his ministers were personally guiding some of the SDTC work. And this was towards energy projects in the north, the Arctic sovereignty, etc. And the PM was really big on that at the time, PM Stephen Harper at that time. Now, these projects unfortunately ended on a really sour note. I'm wondering perhaps if you can speak to the SDTC work early in your tenure as the deputy minister versus in your last year, and kind of compare and contrast with us how ministers get involved in the work that they do, that SDTC did back then to how it is now.
Okay, I'll do my best to answer that question. So I was for 1 year the Associate Deputy Minister of Natural Resources Canada. I believe it was 2007. And Minister Gary Lunn was my minister. And as you say, and it's reported in this Auditor General's report of 2017, there was activity related to carbon sequestration and storage and projects there that were examined. There was the eco energy initiatives that were part of the department. And then there was STTC. What I can say is that Minister Lunn, like Minister Baines, was very eager to make progress on improving clean technology. But, sorry, one more thing. There was also a biofuels program. And you've asked about my history. I also was Deputy Minister of Agriculture with Minister Rich. And so we were very interested as Minister and Deputy in this biofuels fund. So all to say, what I observed as a deputy was there was lots of commitment and activity under both governments, whatever their stripe. There was a different orientation. You described well Prime Minister Harper's orientation. I think what I'd say in terms of the new Liberal government's orientation, it was about building clean tech companies to really promote growth and to commercialize their activities.
Thank you very much for that. And I just realized ex-minister Gary Lunn was named to this fund as well. I do have a list of a board of directors from this organization's inception. And I realized from 2007 to 2015, the majority of them were conservative donors. Do you think that where they decided to spend their dollars for political donations impacted the work that they did? I mean, I would like to know, because I know the Conservatives love to know, how and who and where and what and why. So I would also like to know, for context, do you think that any of these Conservative donors used their positions in SDTC in any way other than what was appropriate?
No. What I would say is that, honestly, the boards that I saw from 2017, which did have some former Conservative members on it, and the board that subsequently followed, this was not a political issue. It was really about, how do we build clean tech in the country, because it really matters? And how do we help clean tech companies become global companies? How do we help clean tech be a leader? And honestly, what I saw...
Sir, I think you have a nosebleed.
I know. Sorry. See what you're doing to me, guys?
Chair, is it okay if we can just pause my time for a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, we can suspend.
No, I'm okay. Just carry on.
Okay.
Because it's not going to stop quickly.
All right. You've got about 30 seconds, Ms. Khalid.
Thanks very much. So point being to our witness today, from 2007 to 2015, we saw a whole bunch of, in terms of context, a whole bunch of people that were appointed that were also card-carrying Conservatives that were donating to the Conservative Party. We've seen the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, personally getting involved in the SDTC and how this money is spent. Ultimately, I like to believe that this is not because somebody's got political agendas to fulfill. It is ultimately to help the clean tech sector. Would you agree with that, sir?
Yeah, as a deputy minister, I did not observe. I observed that everyone was committed to improving the clean tech sector and growing Canada's economy.
Thank you. That is the time. Mr. Newby, I'm going to suspend the meeting for just 5 minutes. Your sound is good, but it's not great. So I'm going to suspend the meeting. Please stay online. I think someone from the IT team is going to call you. So if you could have your phone handy. Okay. But I will suspend right now for 5 minutes, please. Thank you. But do stay online, Mr. Newby. Do not disconnect. Someone will call you. Okay, thank you. This meeting is suspended for 5 minutes. this meeting back into session. It is my intention to finish up for 1 o'clock, and I've spoken to members about that. Mr. Newby, thank you for that. I understand that it's still a bit shaky, so we're going to see how it goes. Can you hear me, Mr. Newby? I should maybe check to make sure you can hear me this time. So, are you hearing me at all, or just give me a thumbs up? You're on mute now, sir. And you're still on mute, sir. Can you see if you can hear you, Clerk?
Yeah, no, sorry.
Yeah. Could you hear me?
Mr. Chair, I can hear you much better.
Great. Okay, good. As I said, so the sound, they weren't able to fix it ideally, so we're going to see how it goes, but it is my intention to finish up by 1 o'clock. So without further ado, we're going to turn things back over to Mr. Perkins. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Nubley, for your patience. I'm a little confused. I'm going to follow up on a little bit of the questions asked earlier. So, Assistant Deputy Minister Noseworthy reported to you, correct?
Yes.
So, did you do regular quarterly reviews or performance reviews of Mr. Noseworthy?
We spoke regularly. I mean, in the case of Andrew Noseworthy, as you likely know, he resides in Newfoundland. And so...
Resided in Newfoundland while he was...
Telephone. Sorry, I'm just going to say it's usually by telephone, that's all. Sorry, go ahead.
He was residing in Newfoundland all this time while he was sitting in the board meetings of SDTC?
Well, I think prior to COVID, he would go to the meetings.
Okay.
As you know, once we went into COVID, it was more virtual.
So
again, I wasn't around. I wasn't around then. You'd have to ask Mr. Noseworthy.
Yeah, we asked him. He had similar memory lapses that we're hearing here. You have a great insight into Ms. Visharen's resume, but don't seem to remember a lot of things around SDTC. For example, Andre Lise-Matteau, who was appointed in 2016, by your own admission, had almost $20 million of conflicts while you were still the deputy. And Mr. Noseworthy never told you that was going on?
No, the only thing that I knew about Lise-Matteau was that she was also a member of the CEO sector table, and she was an active member in that regard, talking about the issues of risk and venture capital relating to clean technology.
They would declare at the beginning of every meeting who had conflicts in what projects. And for the audit period from 2017 to 2023, the Auditor General, she found 82% of the time, 186 of 226 instances where directors were conflicted. That's 82% of the time. I find it unbelievable that ADM Noseworthy would sit there watching board members 82% of their time have to recuse themselves from the meeting, and that would never be reported up.
Well, again, I think you'll have to talk to Andrew Noseworthy on that. One aspect of this that I do understand.
What kind of management did you have where he was your eyes and ears, you said, in the board meeting, but it doesn't appear that the mouth worked in reporting back what he saw to you, according to you. So when ADM Noseworthy told the CEO, Leah Lawrence, that it's okay, the government's going to appoint Ms. Visharen anyway, and that will manage the conflict, did that come from you or did that come from somebody else?
Didn't come from me. I mean, the issue.
Was he taking orders from then? If it wasn't from you, was he taking orders from the minister's office, the prime minister's office? Who would have told him to tell the CEO that will manage the conflicts, the first and only chair of the board of SDTC in its whole history to have done business with it before being appointed?
Well, I think he would have known what I reported I knew, which is that she had gone to the ethics commissioner and that she had also gone through the PCO process, which has been told to you by Donna Lynn McClement, is an extensive
and your minister, Minister Baines, your Minister Baines had an amnesia as well, but Ms. Visharen in her appearance before a parliamentary committee said she didn't apply. Yes, she wrote a week later, her lawyers wrote to correct her statement, but usually the first statement is the correct one, where she said she never applied for anything in her life and that Minister Baines, your minister, called her twice to ask her to be the board chair. Would Minister Baines make those calls without your knowledge?
Yes.
He
I'm not
did.
involved in the process.
Doesn't seem like you were actually very involved in anything in the department. When you have 82% of the time conflicts going on, it seems convenient to say, oh, it wasn't me. My ADM who reported to me must have been getting orders from somebody else. Who else would he get orders from to do this, if not from you or the minister?
So one of the points that I'd like to make is SDTC was probably the smallest agency of 16 agencies that were in the portfolio.
On who SDTC
There are
is.
many appointments. I had to do them not only for
So
Minister
was he
Baines, but the
freelancing?
ministers assigned.
You've known him your
were
whole
the-
life, it seems, you said. Was he freelancing? Was that his nature to make things up on his own without somebody else telling him to do it?
Sorry, I don't know what you're asking.
I'm asking you that you said you didn't know who told him to say, we'll manage the conflict. You have, in your testimony today, said you've known him for 40 years. So in that 40 years of knowledge, do you know him to have been a freelancer
No.
who would go on
I was
his
a
own?
public
Or would he
servant.
be taking orders from somebody else?
Sorry, I never said I talked to Minister Baines on this issue.
That's not what I didn't mention
Secondly, I
Mr.
never,
Baines.
in the 40 years is my service in the public service, where I was proud to represent.
No, you said you've known.
Conservative
no, I'm
Party
sorry.
and
I'm
the
sorry.
Liberal
You said
Mr.
you've
Chair.
known Mr. Noseworthy
Mr.
since
Perkins,
Amish
Mr.
Lake
Perkins,
days.
no, Mr.
Was he a
Perkins.
freelancer?
Mr. Perkins, your time is up. We're going to come back to you on
Oh, I
this.
see you're talking about, I apologize.
Do you want
I apologize,
to?
Mr.
Do you want to
Perkins.
try and answer, Mr. Newbley? Mr. Perkins, your time is up. Do you want to try and answer, Mr.
I'll
Newbley?
just clarify that
Sure.
I thought Mr. Perkins was talking about my relationship with the minister, not Andrew. So I'll leave it for that for now.
All right, we'll
I
Mr. Perkins,
apologize.
we're going to come back to you. You'll be able to take it from the top again. Ms. Yip, you have the floor, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Do you need to take a moment?
Who, me?
Yes, would you like to?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Carry on.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to I can say I'm looking forward to 1 o'clock.
Oh, I can, well, certainly. Okay. Is there anything you'd like to clarify before we go on?
Well, I wasn't sure exactly what Mr. Perkins was asking about Mr. Noseworthy, but I believe, have a trusted relationship with him. I did speak to him regularly. As I've tried to explain earlier, our focus was on performance and policy and alignment related to SDTC. SDTC was one of 12 departments that offered clean tech programs. So this is what we focused on. And on terms of conflict of interest and the financial audit type of issues, what I mentioned is that it's a very delicate relationship between a department and an agency that is independent. As Auditor General reports have demonstrated, there is a requirement that the CEO and the executive and the board are the ones that lead in terms of conflict of interest and the eligibility criteria of contribution agreements. And I think Mr. Noseworthy, but again, I would encourage you to clarify that. That's the way he thought about the job. The job was about policy, alignment, and performance.
Since we're talking about the Auditor General findings, did you have any thoughts about those findings, further thoughts on her recommendations to share with this committee?
Well, I have two thoughts. One I mentioned earlier, which is I do agree with her that the relationship between the department and SDTC would benefit from an MOU or something that spells out clearly what the relationship is and how it's managed. The second thing is, and I noticed it in her testimony, is she raised how the 2001 Act needs to be modernized. And specifically, I mean, there's issues related to membership, which are reported in some of the 2017 and 2018 documents. However, the real issue for me is that the SDTC Act actually requires the directors and chair of the board to approve projects. In my experience, and especially now that I've gone to the private sector and being on boards, most of the boards, like STT, in fact, DC, do exactly the opposite. They ensure that the role of the board is to provide strategy, oversight of operations, but in terms of approval of projects, this is not their job. So I personally believe one of the lessons from all this is that perhaps I should have taken seriously the need to modernize the Act and change it. All I knew at the time was that there was this issue around members, so I didn't see that that could go through the House in any successful way. But now I know that I really should have perhaps focused on how we needed to change this requirement that the directors of the board approve projects.
And what other changes, now knowing what you know, would you recommend?
So in terms of lessons, I would, as I say, I think modernization of the Act, specifying more clearly the role of the departmental liaison, and then I'll add a third. And we were working on this, but I just want the committee to fully understand how important it is. It's all about the data and the framework that you use to judge the data. You need strong data and strong frameworks to actually assess eligibility requirements and to actually report on the way that these are leading to emission reductions. So I think that we were doing the right thing working on this, but I would say that, again, and this is true of all other sectors that are trying to measure climate change impacts, you have to have a baseline set of numbers in order to be able to rigorously assess eligibility requirements and performance. One last point, the other area I think of weakness that I recognized as I looked at all the testimony is that and it shows the surveys of the businesses and that there was this issue of the businesses not completing the surveys at the end of their technology demonstration. So what I knew is that these are very small businesses. They don't have a lot of capacity. And one of the surveys, I think it's in the evaluation, remarks that they heard from all the businesses how onerous this process is. At any rate, how do you address that? I think the department could have provided, or an agency somewhere in the government could have provided some support to the businesses to help them, again, do their reporting on this onerous reporting related to the projects.
Thank you. Suivant encore une fois, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés pour.
Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Madame Lawrence,
Ms. Lawrence stated that she talked to Mr. Noseworthy twice. The first occasion was when she learned that Ms. Verschuren was going to be, was on the short list of candidates to be appointed. And the second time was to be told, when she was told that Ms. Verschuren was going to be the president or the chair. So those are the 2 times that she spoke with him. Once was before she was appointed. At that time, during her conversation with Mr. Noseworthy, she mentioned having some doubts, and Ms. Verschuren hadn't been appointed as the head of the board yet.
I think I should say one thing about Madame Lawrence, and I am speculating here, but she must have known that I was retiring. I had actually announced my retirement in the middle of May.
Excusez-moi, monsieur, ça n'a pas.
My apologies, sir, but that has nothing to do with my question, so...
Donc, monsieur...
Perfect. So, Mr. Noseworthy, so if I go back, so he was at the meetings he was at meetings where the conflict of interest policy was being breached. I gave some examples, and that was when you were deputy minister. He received calls from the chair and the CEO to talk about the concerns that Ms. Lawrence had regarding Ms. Verschuren's appointment, but she didn't mention it to them. That's a lot of things you weren't aware of, especially in a case where you had placed an ADM at these board meetings so that you would be able to get that information, but it seems like the information was not getting to you. When you read the Auditor General's report and the conclusions, did you notice that you had not been aware of a number of things that had been happening at SDTC?
No, I took very seriously the Auditor General's report, and I do believe in the mission of SDTC, and I hope that my former colleagues who are now managing the transition are successful in making that transition. On the issue of reporting to me, I feel I'm repeating myself, but two things. One is there were these two reports that I had just seen in 2017 and 18 that gave it a clean bill of health. And the second thing is
Monsieur,
the job that Andy Noseworthy was mandated to.
Monsieur Noublé.
Mr. Noublé, Mr. Noublé?
Noublé, juste une...
Mr. Noublé, a question. Well, you were supposed to be a bit more generous with me, Mr. Chair. The report you mentioned, is it the report of the report number 3 of the Commissioner to Sustainable Development?
Parce que si c'est le cas, ce n'était...
Because if that's the case, well, it wasn't at all the role of the Commissioner of Sustainable Development to look at how the conflict of interest policy was working. I mean, I looked at his report a few times. It was more to ensure that sustainable development projects were in line with the grants or the contribution agreements, rather, so that not at all in the same optics as or in the same role as the Auditor General. Now, so how can we reconcile that? You know, it's not because things are going well on one front that it's going to go well on another front. And now we hear that there are 90 breaches of the conflict of interest policy just in the time and in the meetings sampled by the Auditor General.
So let me be clear. I agree with you. The Auditor General's report of 2017 was a performance report. So you're right in that regard. I will, however, read, and this is in the report because I scribbled it last night. We found that SDTC had measures in place to mitigate potential conflict of interest in assessing and approving projects.
Thank you very much. Turn now to Ms. Matheson again for your last round or last question round. Over to you, please.
I think that a lot can be said about hindsight, right? In terms of seeing where there were holes and maybe would have done things differently. Mr. Noublé, if you had been given some clear indication from Mr. Noseworthy, I'm not saying you had or you hadn't or what have you, but if you had, in terms of this conflict of interest, you would have reported that to the minister very clearly? Yes or no?
No, in the case of these appointments, it's not my job as deputy minister to report to him on that. In fact, the testimony of Donna Lynn McClement would have demonstrated that. The work that the minister does is primarily done on these appointments through his staff and through PMO as the process is unfolding. I would not normally, and I don't think I ever did discuss, although again, it's a long time ago, these kind of matters with the minister. My primary role as a deputy is to ensure that the process is taking place and timely.
Do you not think, though, that considering what we've seen now, that may be a problem? And I would ask that with all the 40 years of experience and having seen what's happened now, we're moving, SDTC is moving into another reiteration with the same rules that exist in terms of conflict of interest that existed before. So do you think that those changes need to be made? In addition to all the changes that you were talking to Ms. Yip about, all those other changes, do you see that as a potential change that needs to be made?
No, my experience tells me that there's conflict of interest everywhere. The issue isn't that there is a conflict of interest. The issue is that these conflict of interests are being managed. So in this new agency, which I'm hopeful will be very effective and helpful to the clean tech sector, I expect that they, as SDTC before them in its previous incarnation, will be diligent and responsible in terms of applying on an ongoing basis the management of conflicts of interest.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We have two last members remaining, Mr. Perkins and Mr. Duray. Mr. Perkins, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll come at it another way. As a career public servant, Mr. Nubley, you're aware that the Conflict of Interest Act for public office holders says that the public office holder, particularly a GIC appointment, cannot personally benefit, neither can their family, from that appointment. You're aware of that, right?
Yes, there is this issue of profitability and benefit specifically to the person concerned.
In the Conflict of Interest Act of Parliament, but also the SDTC Act is very clear. It says that board members of SDTC, whether they're GIC or non, cannot personally benefit, neither can their family, from being on that board and the decisions of that board. Is that not correct? You just said that you thought that the Act needed lots of changes, so you must be familiar with the Act.
Oh, I'm not terribly familiar with the Act, and I'm not a lawyer. But what I do know, and first of all, it's not my job
you can't have it
to
both
make
ways.
assessments on conflict of interest.
In response to
that
Ms.
is
Yip,
the job of the Ethics Commissioner.
In response to Ms. Yip, you said that the Act needed to be revised, and that's a regret of yours. So you must be familiar with it. So I'm not buying.
No, okay.
I'm not buying that you're not familiar with the Act.
I'm responsible for introducing legislation relating to SDTC. So on my to-do list as a deputy minister for maybe 3 years, the SDTC legislation was on my list. But I was never convinced, and I was never advised, that there was significant enough changes required with that Act to actually introduce it to Parliament.
Okay,
the only issue I was
I'll try
aware
another
of
way.
was the membership issue.
By her own admission in this committee, Andre-Lise Matot had 4 companies while you were deputy minister that got funded while she was on the board. She was appointed in 2016. That total of 4 companies is $21 million. Do you believe that whether they go in or out of the room, that a board member who receives $21 million from the foundation she's on the board of, appointed by the government, is a personal benefit to her when the values of those companies go up as a result of that government investment? Is that not a breach of the Act?
Even as a long-standing deputy minister, that is not my role to judge. That is the Ethics Commissioner role to judge.
You have no responsibility for anything that went on, is what you're saying here. That I know nothing. I had an ADM who was my eyes and ears, but he never actually told me anything. That I see that the Act should be revised, but I don't know what it should be revised on now when 5 minutes later you had some ideas of how it should be revised. That when board members, 82% of the time, are voting for themselves, in contravention of the SDTC Act, which you're responsible to Parliament for as a deputy minister, that you don't believe it was your responsibility to know what was going on there? Who are you covering up for? Why are you saying that it's not your role as a deputy minister to inform the minister when this kind of taxpayer abuse, and I'll remind you that the Auditor General found it to be $390 million. This is not a trivial matter. And you were deputy minister while this was happening.
When I was deputy minister, I received 2 reports that gave SDTC a clean bill of health.
In 2016,
there was no
Andre-Lise Matot's company received,
as far as I knew.
In 2016, Andre-Lise, my time is limited, and he's not answering the question.
I've stopped the clock. I have a point to order.
Chair, I'm not sure how we're expecting answers if we don't let the witness answer the question. And I would be really interested. I think Mr. Perkins asking some great questions, but I would also really appreciate hearing the answers from the witness as well.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Perkins. I will, Mr. Newby, just this is coming late, and I apologize for that. The time is primarily owned by the members, but the way it works around the committee table, should you be cut off and you have a point to make, frequently and almost always another member will allow time for you to finish your thought. So, Mr. Perkins, you have just over a minute left. If you can wrap things up, please.
So in 2016, one of our companies received $12 million. In 2017, another one received $2.5 million from the Green Slush Fund. Another one in 2017, another $2.2 million, and another one received almost $7 million. So this is a lot of money, and I'm having trouble balancing your statement that you had an ADM there, that you believe it was the job of the ADM, and not every ADM believes in this, to tell you what was going on there, yet you sit here at the committee and tell me that your ADM told you nothing about 82% of the time that these directors were in a conflict. It's just not believable.
Well, what I can tell you is that the expectation that I had on these issues was that STTC, its chair, its board, its executive, managed its conflict of interest issues. They were fundamentally independent, and that was their requirement. In terms of Andrew Noseworthy, his responsibility to me was about performance and policy and alignment. And that was our focus at the time. And
responsibility for $1 billion of taxpayer money that he was sitting and watching these directors funnel to companies, $390 million do they own. That you have, the department has no responsibility. I worked in government. I don't believe that for a second, that the deputy minister was so detached from what was going on, and that he had a direct report that he asked to tell him what was going on, that person never told you and you never told the minister. It's not believable.
Mr. Perkins, I respect your point of view. I don't agree with it. The one point of clarification I'd make is that when I was deputy minister, the actual allocation to SDTC, which happened in 2007, was $400 million. It was only in 2021 when they received $700 million. So the issues at play when I was there was in fact related to this $400 million, and I was not there for actually all the allocation of that money.
Thank you very much. Mr. Duray, you have the last question slot to round us out. Over to you, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Newbley, I'm sure it's not the first time that you've appeared before a parliamentary committee. As you've rightly pointed out, you've been a public servant.
I hope it's my last.
Me too. Just kidding. And obviously, you have also served as a senior public servant under the red team, the blue team. You've served honorably under multiple governments. Your style of management, I assume, has not changed while you were serving, whether it was the Liberals or the Conservatives, whomever was in power. Your style of management has not changed in the last 40 years?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I actually prided myself in my ability as a public servant to work with all governments of whatever stripe and with all ministers of whatever personality and approach. And I honestly felt I had good relationships with all the ministers that I worked with, whether at Agriculture, Natural Resources Canada, Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, Transport and Infrastructure, or as we've been talking about, industry, where there was Minister Paradis and Minister Baines and Minister Moore. So I really do want to tell the committee that that's the job of a public servant, to be a loyal, neutral public servant that gives the best advice on the issues they're responsible for.
Thank you. it before, SDTC was only one of 16 agencies under innovation. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's actually not as straightforward as that sounds, because there are independent agencies and then there are others. For example, I had responsibility at the time for overseeing the regional agencies, partly because I had experience there. So the number is 16, but the number of agencies and activities is higher. I couldn't give it. It's probably more like 30.
You see that a lot of members are making reference to specific payments that are not necessarily related to the contribution agreement that you or the department has signed, but are asking you questions on the day-to-day operations of SDTC. How often or how much time would you spend on day-to-day operations of SDTC as Deputy Minister?
I'm not sure I should answer that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one of the smallest agencies. Again, I had to signal from these documents, the AG 2017 evaluation, that it had a clean bill of health. My focus was on EDC. My focus was on, again, developing not just clean technology sector, but also the manufacturing sector, the tourism sector. At the time when I was leaving, there was quite a bit of activity on developing a strategy on tourism. And as we talked about before with Jim Basili, we were working very hard in launching a digital charter, a digital trust approach, and an IP strategy. That was probably one of the highest priorities of the department as we were leaving. As I was leaving, not we, sorry.
Yeah. And just how many people work at, when you left, do you know, what was the budget of Innovation Science?
Yeah. So the budget is when I left was about $7 billion a year. That's for the portfolio and the department. And there are 5,000 people in the department and 25,000 people in the portfolio. So if SDTC, say, is 200 people, they are 200 of the 20,000 who are in agencies in the portfolio.
Okay, so we're talking about a few $1 million, and I don't want to degrade what the Auditor General has said, but the expectations that the Deputy Minister would be spending his day thinking about what happens on a day-to-day basis with a small organization, arm's length organization, understanding that you had somebody else looking at this, any reasonable person would say, yeah, it's absolutely normal that a deputy minister would not understand or not understand, but would not be involved in the day-to-day operations while you have much bigger budgets to worry about and other priorities at the same time. Am I correct to assume that?
Yeah, I'll say three things. Number one, it was not my number one priority. Number two, what I would say is again, from the perspective of the role I play on appointments, I did have a to-do list, and on that to-do list, not at the top, but probably in the middle, was the need to appoint someone as SDTC chair. And I did hope, if you like, that the process would be completed before I retired on June 28th. So maybe the third thing, which is a personal thing, is that I actually had surgery in December 18th for double hip surgery. I continued to work in January, February, and March, but I did not really come back to work in the office until March. So this also, so why did I not participate in the process? I don't think I ever would have, but the fact is, from a physical perspective, I could not do so.
Thank you. Mr. Duda, do you have a last question? Okay, very good. Thank you. We are done then. Mr. Newbley, I want to thank you for coming in today, for your testimony and participation in relation to our study. You mentioned in the first part of the meeting you had some documents to submit. We're happy to receive those. You can send those in to the clerk. And just members, I think you've received notice now that the Auditor General is tabling her fall reports on December the 2nd. So just be aware of that. There'll be an especially long day with a lockup and then a briefing with the Auditor General, both in camera and as well before committee. On that, I will adjourn just a few minutes after 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.